Opening up an M4 airsoft gearbox. Pull the air latch. Cool, that's the quick way. Let's rebuild it and then go the slow way and explain everything. And I will not be going over how to rebuild the gearbox this video. This video is actually going to be several parts because closing the gearbox is different than opening the gearbox, and which is also different from all different parts of the gearbox. So this video will just be about opening the gearbox because that is a trick on its own. It is one of the more stressful parts of working on airsoft guns. And the other is closing the gearbox. And depending on what you're used to, one can be worse than the other. But I will definitely show you some tricks on how to make it easier. Cool. All right, so tools needed. Magnet. Need a magnet. I'll go why in a moment, but you need a magnet. You don't have to get a fancy store one. Just any magnet. Not a refrigerator magnet. You need to be a little bit strong, so definitely get a magnet. Allen key of some kind. Definitely recommend a dental pick of some kind. The type of screwdriver for the screws in your gearbox, it's going to almost always be Phillips, but Tokamurui and Keiwei use like a Torx T8 or a T10. I want to get that as well. And also want knife can be handy sometimes as well. I recommend getting a small flathead as opposed to a knife though for what we'll be doing. So first off, because of how airsoft guns work, obviously there's a spring that's compressed by a piston, but not all the time is this fully decompressed. So sometimes the gun will half cycle or do a partial cycle, which means that the main spring will be under tension because there's several springs in the gearbox. So what you want to do is you want to take a dental pick. You're actually going to reach inside the gearbox, and there's an AR anti-reversal latch. You want to pull it up, and now I already released it, but when you heard me do it earlier, you heard a little bit of the tension go out. If it's really underneath tension, like halfway, you'll hear it slam forward. but that'll make the gearbox a lot easier to open and a lot less likely for springs to go everywhere, because there are several springs all under tension inside a gearbox. The other thing you want to check for is if your gearbox is quick change. And when I say quick change, it's more like semi-quick change. Most of the M4 airsoft guns, you have to break it down to the gearbox. Then you can do the spring change easier, like this Crytek gearbox. It has a slit, so the spring guide just goes inside, really easy. And to take it out, all you do is rotate it. You rotate it, remove it, and then when you put the spring back in, you put it back in and you rotate it. That way it stays locked, and for simple spring swaps, you don't have to open the entire gearbox, you just have to do that. It's way easier. But if your gearbox is quick change, and you try to take off the gearbox shell, most times it's going to fly everywhere. So, yeah. So we're going to start off with, we pull the anti-reverse latch, make sure there's no tension. We're going to keep a magnet underneath there, so that way the anti-reverse latch stays in place, otherwise that's going to go that way. So that'll take care of that. So I'm going to take all the screws out by one, put it in the dish, that way they don't go flying over the place, roll off the table. When you're rebuilding something, if you have extra parts in your dish, you know you missed something and you need to check your work. It really doesn't matter which screw you leave in last. Just whatever is fine. I'll probably do I generally keep the top one because there's a lot less threads. So imagine there's several springs that are tension. There's the main spring, the anti-reverse latch spring, the trigger spring, and the tappet plate spring. And the ones that are most likely going to fly out when you're doing this wrong is the main spring and the anti-reverse latch spring. Not so much the trigger spring, and almost never the tappet plate spring because it's caught in place. But we will go into that in future videos, and I'll show you all about those. But this one is just about opening the gearbox. And by the way, I bought a VFC standard gearbox. This is a front wired, obviously. I will go over why this is different than a rear version. But with just the standard gearbox, it's really easy to see. And then all the technical stuff will be done on just this gearbox. So if you're watching all these videos, you'll be able to see everything from one gearbox when we separate different gearboxes. So everything will look the same, and you will be able to keep track of things easier. So for the spring guide, for anything that's not quick change, most of the time the spring guide is hollow. So you take an Allen key, I'm going to stick it down in there, I'm going to push down. That will keep the spring guide pushed down while I open the gearbox. If I didn't do that, it could rotate and shoot out, and that means your spring guide is going that way and your spring is going anywhere. So this pushing down on the spring guide will stop that from happening. Take the last spring screw. At this point, what I'll do, flat screwdriver or spring guide, I'm just going to wedge up slightly so I can get my hand in there. I'm pushing down on the cylinder because that's another part of the main spring that can pop out. So I'm pushing that up. I'm lifting up from the rear of the gearbox so I can get the spring guide up, lifting up on that Allen key. There, and we've diffused the bomb. I can remove the gearbox shell. There's all the goodies. And we will go over those in more detail next time.